forgot to press the record button just now. A lot of time people create products that nobody wants. And then you introduce product to the market and there's no product market fit. So what happened is you invest a lot of time developing the product, doing R&D, and in the end, when it hits the market, it doesn't get the reception that you would have wished for. So there are techniques in design thinking for us to design our product so that we can sort of reduce the risk by learning early what people really want. And then on, design thinking also uses the lens of feasibility. Can it be done, right? There are times where when you introduce product to a market, it has to meet certain criteria. For example, if you're building an app, your app cannot crash all the time or have so many bugs or is prone to privacy issues, right? So you have to look at the feasibility aspect, whether you have the capability or you can source for the materials for you to develop the product. Next is viability. Viability is if you do something, is it sustainable? Many of the time when people come up with the product, it is something that follows trend or it's just hot for a short period of time or they're just following the bandwagon. A very good example is the hand spinner, right? Although people are still using it to address anxiety and all that, but it wasn't as big as when it started off, right? Where everybody started to order it or start to manufacture it, start to design it, right? So the viability aspect is another consideration or another lens that you apply for when you're designing using the design thinking method. So a combination of desirability, feasibility, viability is where the sweet spot of innovation is. So next we look at the phases of design thinking. If you explore design thinking, they are like sometimes 5, 7, 4. So for the benefit of this introductory webinar, we've sort of summarized it to 3 main phases of design thinking. Number 1 is it starts by having empathy. That means putting your customer first, taking time to talk to them, understanding their needs, their wants, their dreams, their aspiration. So that's a good starting point for you in whatever product that you're trying to develop, right? Even if you're in construction. Next, after you've gathered all the inspiration, you're able to empathize with your end user or the stakeholders. Next, it's to ideate what kind of solution that you can come up with. So in this stage, the idea is to come up with a lot of ideas using the tools that we will share in the next pages so that you can actually start wide and narrow down on what is the best solution, best idea to take forward for you to prototype. Prototype, in essence, is building so that you can learn. It's not the final product. Imagine if you straight away go into production, then you'll be like, you know, having to have a minimum MOQ and all that. So, and MOQ, I mean, minimum, like a large unit of production. So they will be very costly. Prototype allow you to fail early so that it can succeed sooner. That means that building things that are a little bit scrappy, it illustrates the benefit, but it is not the complete product. If you see in the car industry, for example, people draw their car first before they actually build a brand new car. So drawing is obviously cheaper than going to a manufacturing plant to produce a car. Nowadays, prototyping is easier than before because people can actually use softwares, use SketchUp, for example, for 3D design, and also use 3D printing, which is, while it's not the cheapest option, but it's still cheaper than going full production. Right? Again, and it is in design thinking, you will be familiarized with this concept of creating a lot of choices and then narrowing and converging into making the choice. So it's not just perpetually or just blue sky dreaming about a lot of ideas that you want to do. It's quite practical in the sense that you actually choose which idea based on the timeline, the budget that you have, that you will choose to go forward. So I'm gonna before you start the empathy process, you need to have a problem that you want to solve. You need to have a challenge that you want to tackle. right? In this case, we frame our problem with the statement HMW, which stands for how might we. How might we is a very powerful statement, and we use it a lot in the design thinking process. So how might we encapsulate these three qualities? How, which is solution oriented; might, which is very optimistic. If I were to say, how might Azuar become the top scorer of the English Premier League, for example? Although it sounds quite improbable, but might just give you a spark of hope. So having hope is very important as an entrepreneur, where you are working with a lot of your team members, your partners, and sometimes the silver lining might not be so obvious, right? And third, we use the word we. Because if you want to go fast, you go alone, as they say. But if you want to go far, it has to be in a team, together, right? So the idea is, if you're building a company, it is how do you work together? Because that way you can leverage on each other's discipline and expertise. So samples, your how might we question, for example, need to be focused on the need rather than a functional typo there. Yeah. No, it's correct. Rather than a functional benefit. Focus on need, meaning that how do you make the commuting experience easier? How do you help the elderly adapt to technology when it may be difficult for them? How might we encourage children to eat healthier, right? So there's a goal towards it. It's not so much a functional benefit, like how do you make my product 5 inch taller, or how do I make the car goes 10 kilometers faster. When applying design thinking, when crafting your how might we statements, you want to focus on the people's need. Remember, we always focus on empathy. We start with people, right? Number two, when you state your how might we statement, it should not be so obvious, like a yes and no question, or the answer is so obvious. It should be broad enough that allow you to discover unexpected answer when you're trying to answer the question. That means that you don't want the questions like, how do I build an app, right? That means that maybe you leave the app out. The app can be an option, but maybe it could be a VR experience. It can be a workshop even, right? And thirdly, it has to be tight enough so that it's not so broad. A very common example that I always use is, how do I make world peace, right? It's so wide. How do I end climate change? Although it's doable, but at the scale of what we have, the resource in terms of resources and all that, perhaps we tackle more immediate, more manageable problem, like waste management in Sarike, or how do you say this? Give example, or access to programming education in Baram, for example. So it is tight enough that it is actually realistic for you as a startup, as a new entrepreneur, to start up and tackle those goals, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it has to be phrased, it should be phrased as a goal. So here are some examples of how might we statements that I've put in here for you to spark inspiration for you to come up with your own how might we statement. So how might we improve the commuting experience for people in Kuching, right? In Kuching, for example, now, not like when I was living in Kuching last time, public transport was quite hard for people to use, actually. We had to wait like half an hour for a bus. And if you miss one bus, it means that it's another almost an hour wait for the next bus. So I think now it's a little bit easier. I think you guys have, not you guys, I mean, we have new buses, I think like even electric buses, hydrogen buses in Kuching. So I think it may have improved to an extent, but I believe it can be improved further, maybe in terms of the wait time. It can be quite boring, or safety for women when they're traveling at night. So these are exploration that you can do just by tackling this how might we statement. Number two, how might we help smallholder farmer diversify the income? Many farmers, they focus on several crops, and that's basically the income. What else can they do to generate income, right? So obviously this will spark many ideas. Maybe They can do like a homestay where people can come in and help farm at their farms, right? So things like that. Number 3 is how might we increase access to clean energy in our community, right? So like energy like solar, like wind, and the waste to energy, for example. What can we do to help this? So I'm going to show a video of an application of design thinking, because sometimes hearing somebody talk is not the same as actually witnessing it for yourself. So this is an example of design thinking being applied, I believe, in India to help the problem of child mortality, right? So let's watch the video.
My name is Jane Chen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Embrace. Embrace is a social enterprise that aims to develop a line of affordable healthcare technologies for people in emerging markets, starting with a low-cost infant incubator that we've developed. I graduated from the business school at Stanford in 2008. My first year at Stanford Business School, I took a class called Design for Extreme Affordability, which is half engineers, half MBAs who come together to develop affordable technologies for people living on less than $1 a day. So the challenge posed to my team was build a baby incubator that costs less than 1% of the cost of a traditional incubator, which is $20,000 in the US. The background of the problem we're addressing here: about 20 million low birth weight and premature babies are born every year around the world. 4 million babies die in the first 28 days of their life. That's 450 babies every hour. One of the biggest problems they face is staying warm because they don't have enough body fat to regulate their own temperature. And as a result, many either die or they grow up with severe long-term health problems. The most common solution to this problem is in a traditional incubator. But incubators are not only expensive, they require a constant supply of electricity. So you don't find them in rural areas where most of these babies are dying. And as a result, what you see are really unsafe, ineffective solutions, ranging from putting light bulbs over the babies to tying hot water bottles around their bodies to just holding them over hot coals. So based on the research we did in India, we realized that what was needed was not just a lower cost version of what exists today, but something that works without a constant supply of electricity, that's easy enough for a mother or a midwife to use, that's portable, that's really easy to clean. And what we've come up with looks like this. This is the Embrace infant warmer. It looks like a little sleeping bag for an infant. The core technology sits back here, this little pocket. So this is a pouch of what's called a phase change material. It's a wax-like substance that melts and then maintains a temperature of 98 degrees Fahrenheit, human body temperature, for about 4 to 6 hours at a time. The key is once melted, it maintains that temperature. And that's the most important part of keeping these babies alive and healthy, not just warmth, but the consistency of heat. Embrace's long-term vision is to create a whole line of affordable healthcare technologies and to leverage everything we've learned about design, distribution, and manufacturing to come up with other products for the communities that we serve. And that's really the basis of what we're doing.
All right, I'm going to switch on the mic because I've done a lot of online classes, and I think it's good to just check the pulse of everyone for a while, right? So guys, are you clear with what design thinking? Are you excited to apply the technique of design thinking? I need to also speak in Bahasa, in and out. Can I hear some participants?
Pagi. Saya Ustaz nak ambil masalah ke Sarawak. Saya masak nasi tadi awal saya turun. Nanti saya masak bubur. Untuk orang
Dennis, are you?
Kalau hitam dia berlemak. Nasi dia lembut. Tapi tiga-tiga dia.
Kalau dekat
Every,
WhatsApp pun ada. Kita tengok dekat profile ya, ni ada katalog siap. Semua ada siap. Stiker, business card, brochure, flyer, semua ada.
some are actually outside. But guys, if you have any question, please unmute and I will pause from time to time if you have any questions, right? Okay, cool. So this will be the first activity. You're not going to do it today. So basically what we'll do is we'll send you a Google form, and for each module or webinar or subject that we will have for the Share LiveWIRE, you will submit your answer in the Google form that we will share later. All right. Again, for the benefit of some of you that are just joining, maybe I'll repost the Google Drive so that you can download Google Drive link so you can download the module for today, right? Okay. All right. I can see Sarah there. I kind of lost my voice, but I'm here and I'm listening. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, you can post your questions or anything on the chat as well. I'll try to answer. So don't be shy, guys. Okay, so this is the first activity. When you go back after the webinar, reflect on, maybe you can start off with your product, but what is it that your product aspire to solve for the customer? Or if you haven't got a product, you can identify areas and frame it as a question. How might we, for example, help smallholder farmers diversify their income? All right. Okay, let's move on. Next is the first step of design thinking, which is applying empathy. Empathy is very powerful, very important, very much appreciated, but not that common, unfortunately, right? So design thinking begins with empathy and understanding the needs for who you are designing for. So always start, once you frame the problem, ask yourself, who is it that I'm really doing this for? You know, where do they live? How old are they? And what are their education background? How much are their income, right? Because if you design something that they can't afford, then you may have to pivot and make ways where they can still have access to it, but maybe the payment is in installment or by a subscription, or maybe through sponsorship of other people that can afford to pay for the service in exchange for something, for example. So this is a video illustrating what empathy is. Empathy is not sympathy. Oh, I am rich, poor guy, here 5 ringgit. Oh, here's 100 ringgit. That's not empathy, that's sympathy. Empathy is like, how can I really help this person, right? That is, how, if I were in this person's shoes, how would I feel? That is empathy. So this video illustrates that. Right?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. To me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. So how do you learn, or how do you begin to practice empathy? There are many ways, but for the introductory webinar that we have today, we've singled out two, I think, best and easiest one for you to start with. Number one is observation, and number two is interviewing someone, right? So observation, obviously, I think observation, another word for observation is actually listening with your eyes. That means you're not just looking at somebody, but looking at the behavior or the place or the location, how they behave, what prompts them a certain way. But in a way, you processing it in your mind so that you can learn, right? So one way of doing this is just to sit somewhere where your end user or your customers are, and just sit down and observe, and maybe bring a journal with you and write down, you know, how do they behave? What triggers them to act a certain way, and such, right? And number two, it's interviewing. Sometimes the best way is just to go and ask somebody, right, directly. But even with interviewing, there are techniques, because sometimes there are cognitive biases where people may not be giving the full picture because of how the interview is conducted, or maybe because they are shy, and so many other factors. So some tips for, the picture is wrong. Correct. So 5 tips for observation. Sorry, it's not 5 tips for interviewing, 5 tips for observation. Look for things that prompt behavior. For example, if you're tackling issues of domestic violence, right? What triggers it, right? Is it the husband being stressed, or is it the husband is naggy and the wife become violent to the husband, right? Number one. Number two, look for adaptation. Sometimes people don't buy the exact product for it, but they use other means. One good example is for ladies with long hair. Sometimes they use chopstick, right, to get their hair in order. So those are adaptations. So maybe somebody will create products that, like, you know, like that looks like a chopstick, but it's very attractive. Another example is the face mask that people are using because of COVID-19, right? Before this, it was a surgical mask, it was N95 and all that. But now you start to see batik being adapted, and other design patterns as well, right? Number three, look at what people care about. A good example, if you're dealing with children, for example, right? What do they enjoy? What don't they enjoy? How do you make things that they don't enjoy, enjoyable by looking at the things that they actually like doing, right? Number three, body language. Sometimes people do not enjoy themselves or look stressed, and you can identify it by just looking at how their body are. Like, for example, if people are defensive, they normally will fold their arms together, right? So, or if people are tired, then maybe they're slouching. So these body languages can inform can give a lot of insights when you are doing observation, right? Number 3, look for patterns. As I mentioned earlier, similar to prompting behaviors. Look for when people act a certain way. For example, if you look at accidents, right? Car accident, vehicle accidents. So patterns, probably it happens at night, right? Maybe visibility is low, maybe people are tired. So then by observing this, maybe you can offer an app that reminds people to take a break or grab a coffee or something like that, right? Number 6, look for unexpected. An example of this is similar to the example I gave earlier with ladies who are using chopsticks to get their hair in order, right? For some, it may not be expected, but at the same time, people are not just using chopsticks, but they also use pen, right, as replacement for their hair organizer, I guess. Right? So when we look at interviewing, right? Interviewing, how do you make people be the most comfortable and open to share information, feelings with you, right? Number 1 is to ask open-ended question. Don't ask people like, why did you, for example, why did you, for example, yes or no question, right? A yes or no, right? That means that you are dictating the options that people have. Open-ended questions goes more on why. So you ask somebody like, why are you late this morning? Because I missed the train. Because I left the house late. Why did you leave the house late? Or because I slept late. Why did you sleep late? Because yesterday I had to do extra errands and all that. So that way you get to have that person share more information and more meaningful and deep information with you, which will give you valuable input when you're developing your product or services, right? Number 2, you can ask somebody, oh, I don't quite understand that. Can you show me a picture or what do you use, right? So that's another tip that you can use for interviewing. Because sometimes having that object there, it's easier for people to articulate, right? As they say, a picture says 1,000 words, right? Number 3, start broad and finish deep, right? Don't ask somebody like during the interview, straight away ask them, Dennis, how much do you make every month? You know, and then they will probably be like, oh, why is this person like ambushing me or asking me a very sensitive question? You can get to that question, but first you should ask them like, you know, how are you today? How are you feeling, right? Or you can ask them, dah makan, you know? And then from there you start to build that relationship, which allow you to ask more personal and intimate questions. Number 4, is build rapport. Rapport is, for example, you need to make that connection. Remember we talked about, when we saw the video earlier, he said it's all about connection. Empathy is about, you know, feeling how the other person is feeling. So one way to build rapport is, if you're going to a rumah panjang, for example, right? Don't wear a suit. Don't, look like something that mirroring who you are interviewing with. Your body language as well, you know, the language that you use, you should be relaxed so that your interviewee or the participant that you're interviewing or the potential customer that you're interviewing is comfortable to share information with you. Okay. 5th is mind the gap. Sometimes if the person is thinking and they're like pausing, let them be. Don't jump and try to push them or prompt them or moving on to the next question so fast. Maybe they're like digging something deep inside of them. So that can be quite a gem or an insight for you for your purpose, right? Okay, so this is the next exercise which you will be submitting based on the product that you already have or the product that you are changing throughout the process of these webinars that we're going to have with Shell LiveWIRE. Ask yourself, who are you observing or who you are interviewing? You can combine both techniques or you can choose either one for this activity, right? Maybe if you are selling something like for people who are interested to improve their health, right? Perhaps you're interviewing somebody who's in their 40s or their 50s with certain health condition like heart problems and all that. Or if you are looking at parents, for example, mothers that are looking to encourage children to read, then you look at observing them in their space, right? Maybe you go and look at your aunt or your family members or your friends, and from there gain insights. What did you learn by observing them, or what did you learn from the conversation or the interview that you have with them? All right. So with that, I'm gonna unmute the mic again, or maybe I'll try to answer some of the questions in the chats, right? If there's any. Any question, guys? You guys have been very quiet, and can be a good or bad sign. Good sign is you understand. A bad sign is I'm not. Maybe you're a bit shy, perhaps. And, any question, guys? So far? Let me look at the chat. There's some questions here. When do we need to submit the Google Form questions for the activities? We'll share the Google Form somewhere in the middle of the course. And then the deadline for submission at the end. So you need to record the interview session. You could if the person is comfortable. But sometimes people are a little bit camera shy. So you ask permission first. But otherwise, having a journal and just taking notes is fine as well, right? Because especially when you put a camera in between you and the person, that person might be a bit self-conscious, right? So they will give you answer that not real. How do you get people to open up whether or not they will buy your product or service instead of giving you false positive? This is what we talked about, cognitive bias just now. So this, I guess there's no 100% silver bullet to solve this, Alexander, but by building their rapport, by starting wide, by making them understand that the context of why you're asking the questions, then they will open up. I mean, they're more likely to open up and give you honest answers. And next is, you should not just interview one person. So there's a risk if you interview one person and you base your product on this one person's response, it may not be precise. But if you start interviewing 10 people or 5 people, for example, you'll start to develop a pattern. And that pattern is quite valuable in recognizing whether your product is likely to be product market fit, right? If that's clear, right? Okay, I'm gonna mute everyone back and we'll move on to the third topic. Right? So after you went through the first step, because this is a 3-step process for the benefit of as a reduced version of design thinking, perhaps, right? Hold on, there's some chat questions here. Okay, let me try to answer some of the questions before we move on. So that I think it's to the benefit of others as well. Is there a recommended sample size for the people that we should talk to? It is not so much scientific, but for a semi-structured interview, for example, you can do 10, it's good enough, I think, right? But obviously the more precise it is, but you do not want to spend so much time, because with design thinking, it is what we call an iterative process, meaning that you start with 10, you move on to developing some ideas, you prototype that idea, and from then, if you think that you need to do more interviews, you can always go back and do more interviews to sort of learn more about the people that you are trying to serve, right? So very good question, Alexander. And also similar question with Dennis, I guess. Huh? Okay, next we'll move on to generating ideas. So this is the fun part. For generating ideas, I recommend you always have like a marker. I always love those Sharpie pens because they look so nice, like candies. But also get yourself some post-its. It doesn't have to be the expensive post-its, anything that you can stick, for example. Or if you do not have post-its, just a journal would do as well. Just start brainstorming and mind mapping and putting up all the things that pops up in your mind in trying to solve the problem that you frame early in the subject, that we discussed early in the subject just now. Okay. All right. So the idea here is the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. Again, I've noticed some questions on the chat earlier. We talk about a scientific method. Scientific method is good, but sometimes, not sometimes, more often than not, people are quite irrational. So even if you apply the most scientific method, I mean, barring healthcare and certain things that like engineering, for example, where it is a precise science, but when you're dealing with products that are facing customer facing, right? I think that it is a creative process. So design thinking is an excellent creative process to solve problems, right? So there are many methods in solving problems, but design thinking has proven itself to be very effective when solving problems that are customer facing or customer driven, I guess, right? So here, to quote this quote, right, the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. As I mentioned, you can start with having a lot of post-its, some markers, and maybe a huge wall that you can paste things on, and just start dumping ideas or putting up ideas that come to your head, right? The thing with coming up with ideas is usually the first 5-10 ideas are quite obvious. It's something that many people would have thought about, right? If you want to come up with original idea, if you want to make product that are novel, that is unique, that is different than what's available in the market, then more often than not, you have to go beyond the initial 5 to 10 ideas. So I recommend even coming up with 50 or 100 ideas. These ideas, you may select just one, or from the ideas themselves, you can build on top of each other and combine them to make a product that have some point of parity and some point of differentiation, right? So one popular technique for coming up with ideas, brainstorming, you can brainstorming in teams, but if you do not have teams yet, you can get friends to join you, or if you don't have any friends for some reason, then you can still brainstorm alone by yourself, right? So here are some rules, 7 rules when brainstorming. Number 1 is always to defer judgment, meaning that when you come up with an idea, you think it's silly, you think it's foolish, you think that it's not going to work. Don't worry about it yet. In the first part, if you see the earlier slides, right, you are diverging, you are making choices, you're not creating choices yet. So just put your ideas out there and put as many as possible, because getting some ideas out of your head can clear it so that other ideas can come out, right? Number 2 is to encourage wild ideas. What if I have 1 million ringgit? Or what if, I can combine so and so technology? So encourage wild ideas. Number 3 is, while it's good to go with wild ideas, you should have some constraint as well. For example, what ideas you should not consider? Things that are dangerous or polluting to the environment, for example. That's out of the question. Or constraint can also be, I'm just going to brainstorm for half an hour, so I'm going to come up with as many ideas as possible within this half hour. So having constraints actually push people to be more creative, to not limit themselves. It's contradictory, but it actually works. Number 4 is to build on the ideas of others. If you have your partners that are brainstorming with you, or your friends that are brainstorming with you, if they have an idea, don't be defensive, or that's my idea, or that's your idea. Basically, you're working together. So you can add on, that's nice, and I'm going to add this to that, right? One example. Number 5, when brainstorming, sometimes people tend to change the topic just because they lack the focus and discipline. So when brainstorming, I always suggest put a sheet of paper somewhere or leave your laptop with the screen with huge, bold, how might we statement that you have identified early on, right? So if your problem is how might we improve commuting experience in Kuching, so have it there, so people will come up with experience like maybe we have food at bus stops, or the bus stop have Wi-Fi, or they are people can actually have share on social media with hashtag or something, right? From the experience while commuting, right? That's number 5. Number 6 is to be visual. Sometimes you don't just have to write something, you can draw it as well. You can just take a piece of Post-its or on your journals, draw something. This is my idea. It looks like this. It's a person wearing a scarf, carrying, taking a selfie of himself at the bus stop, for example, right? Number 7, this is the most important one. Don't worry about quality yet, right? The quality will come once you start to prototype, once you start to converge. But when you are brainstorming ideas, focus on quantity, right? The aim is to be as productive as possible by looking at how many ideas you can come up with the time that you have set up, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's an hour. I don't recommend brainstorming too long because it can be quite tiring, I guess. But you can brainstorm and then pause for a bit and brainstorm again if you need more ideas, right? Okay, after you've come up with a lot of ideas, how do you decide which idea to go forward with? So one way is to vote. Right? If you have 3 people in your team or 5 people in your team, give them maybe 3 votes each. Out of the 100 ideas that we have, which one do you vote for? So you can mark with a star, or sometimes what I love to do is I have like little stickers where you can actually mark on the Post-its, so you see which idea are the most popular, right, among the member of your brainstorming group, right? Number 3 is to cluster them. Some ideas are actually related. So maybe you can cluster one idea in terms of, like we talked about the bus stop example earlier. This is to make the traveling commuting experience more entertaining. Or this is related to safety. This is related to maybe productivity, right? If I were to take the bus and all that, how do I enhance my productivity by having Wi-Fi? Maybe spaces where I can take calls, where people are not listening about the business deals that I'm talking about, right? All sort of crazy ideas. Number 3, obviously, once you have a lot of the ideas, you can combine these steps, or you can do it on individually, is to look at clusters or the things that you have voted and discuss about it, like why we should move forward with this idea, and be able to keep an open mind that it's not about being defensive or pushing your idea forward. Whatever it is a collective effort, it is a collective idea, right? And lastly is you have to decide. You cannot like perpetually be in what we call paralysis by analysis, right? That means that with the technique, with any endeavor that you're doing, it's always good to have a deadline or timeline to it. So it's the same with the design thinking method of developing your initial product, right? So decide we're gonna spend 1 week on this most, but come Friday or come Wednesday, we will decide on one idea and we will move on. It doesn't work, then we'll go back. But we will try our best to move the idea forward, right? Okay, so here are the activity that I will need all of you to complete later in the Google form. Once you've generated your ideas, the maybe 50 ideas or 30 ideas or 100 ideas even, which are the top 5 ideas? This means that this is related to voting or related to clustering, the 5 ideas. And which ideas did you or your team choose to move forward with? So that's the 3rd activity. We have 4 activities altogether. They're not hard activities. They're quite simple, actually. Just 2 questions or 1 question each. So now I'm going to open for any questions. please post your questions on the chat group as you have before. Okay, this is a good question actually from Dennis. I think it's Dennis because he puts there his company name, right? Yes, obviously you can use secondary data as well, but you should. I would encourage you to combine them with the design thinking method that we discuss here, because that will give you more of the insights rather than the data. Right? There's a famous saying which says, "You lead with beauty, but you follow with the math." Right? That means that by identifying what is the human aspect, a human factor or human consideration, then you can make the generalization supported by the data that you have, right? Any question on generating ideas, guys, before we move on to the last module, last topic? Okay, let's move on to the last topic, right? Since there are no questions, but if there are any questions, feel free. What if the idea already existed? Okay, there's nothing wrong with coming up with more ideas. I think some of the questions that I'll be getting through WhatsApp as well is, you already have your idea, you posted it on the application, for example. That's fine. You can use the initial idea as a basis, for example, if you feel very strongly about it. But from then on, you see, how can I improve this, for example? How might we, what else can I add? In that sense, you're not sort of having a fix. Does the idea need to be novel? Ahmad Tamizi. In a way, yes. Because if in business, right, I will share this tomorrow, right? But I will share, I will give a bit of introduction today. I think in any business, there is always competition, number one. Number two, how do people choose you over the next product? Why do I go to Sarah, or why do I go to Jadira, or why do I go to Crystal? There have to be a point of differentiation, right? That means that there's point of parity. For example, if it's nasi lemak, nasi lemak A, nasi lemak B, nasi lemak C. So this nasi lemak is tastier because some customer like the sambal to be a little bit sweeter, for example. Or this one, the chicken is so crispy, right? That way, because in business, it's quite challenging to dominate the market entirely. Even Apple have its competition with Samsung, for example, right? All right. So that's one of the reason is you have to have a point of differentiation, which is the novelty, Ahmad Tamizi, to get people to choose A over B. And in marketing as well, you will highlight that novelty. Is it your customer service, right? Very simple example people always use is comparing cars. Why do people choose a BMW over a Mercedes-Benz, for example? People choose a BMW because it's performance. Right? People choose Mercedes-Benz because it's more luxurious or status symbol, right? Why do people choose Shell, for example? Because it goes further, I guess. All right. Let me see some of the questions. In our case, can it be 5 product variation rather than 5 ideas? Yes, a product variation is in a form ideas, Jadira. Idea is just a broad term, but it can be a product variation. It can be a product features. Your idea doesn't mean changing the product altogether. Don't get me wrong. That's a very good question, Jadira. But an idea can be things that enhances or build on. That's why in this slide, right, we talk about building on the ideas of others. It can be your existing ideas as well. It doesn't have to be other people's ideas. What if the ideas are overlapping with each other? It's okay. Right? It means that you can combine them, or you can cluster them as the same group of ideas or the same type of ideas. So later on, we have the WhatsApp group. You have my contact details as well. If you are stuck with brainstorming or ideation, you can just hit me a message or something, and I will try to assist the best as I can. All right? Okay. We're like almost time, but I want to cover, give me maybe 5-10 minutes so that I can cover the last module, right? So the last module for the day is rapid prototyping. You've empathized with the need of your customer, right? The people that you're trying to serve, the elderly, the parents, the people that are living in rural areas, people with disabilities, children, right? Bumi Putra and not Bumi Putra, sorry, people who are living in the interiors, right? So and then you've come up with ideas based on the problem that you have framed earlier. What kind of ideas you think best help or best solve the problem that you framed, right? Now it's time to prototype. Prototype is probably the thing that takes the longest time in the design thinking process. So prototype allows you to learn from failure early and inexpensively and invite others to react to your idea. Number one, by building things using maybe lower cost materials in the beginning, just by drawing or just by putting together some foam board or using strings, for example, right? Allows you to learn early and inexpensively. Number two, the idea of a prototype is not to impress yourself. It's actually to go out and show people, would you want to buy this? Or would you want to try this, right? One way of prototyping, if you're in an F&B business, is, for example, just to make a few sets of meal in the house and share it with people that fits the demographic or the profile of the customer that you're serving, and asking feedback from them. What did you like about it? Was it too spicy? Or do you like it a bit more, the portion to be bigger, for example, right? I'll answer your questions shortly, AJ. Yeah? Sorry. So by prototyping, it allows you to build in order to think. Sometimes when you put things on paper, or it's just an idea, or it's just an essay, or it's just a proposal, it doesn't really allow you to make the idea tangible. Right? It's different when you're able to touch it, to see it, to like turn it upside down. So it allows you to think differently about the product that you're offering to the market, right? Or even to taste it, for example. Or as Sarah, as I know, she's making some fragrance. Or it's different talking about the perfume that has a blend of orchid and lavender and white moss and all that, rather than actually smelling how it smells like, right? Number two, it allows you to gather feedback from stakeholders and end user. Maybe you can get feedback even from suppliers. Would you be able to supply these materials for me, right? By showing them the prototype. And end users, the customer themselves. And number three, the most important, and I think I can't stress this enough, is allow you to fail early. Don't be afraid of failing, right? But you don't want to fail where it will make you, like, it will cost you a bomb, for example, right? You want to fail cheap, fail sooner, right? So that you can succeed sooner. Lastly, what can you prototype? Number one, you can build the physical product. If you're building an app and you don't want to go full programming yet, right? Because you want to know whether it's worth investing all the time and efforts and resources, then you can do a digital prototype where maybe you just do a flat 2D design first, right? And show people this is how the homepage looks like, this is how the product page looks like, this is how the checkout page looks like. Number three, it can be you can prototype the experience. I gave an example of the food, but you can also prototype experience in terms of the hotel or the homestay or glamping space that you're designing. You can prototype experience on how the customer service is, right? It doesn't have to be the entire product or service. You can actually choose a part of the product which you think are important for the customer to prototype first, and then build from that. Nowadays, people talk about always on beta, right? If you look at Facebook, you look at a lot of the tech companies, or Apple even, right? They just launch the product every year, and from the customer feedback that they receive, they improve their product for the coming years. Okay, these are the steps of prototyping. Start by building. Go out there, go out of the building, go out of your house, go out of your shops, go out of your universities, and share it with people. Right? What would you think of this, right? And thirdly, is to reflect. Once you get feedback, you don't have to accept all the feedback, but try to reflect. What did you learn? Similar to the interview process, what insights do you gain from the sharing process that you can add to improve your product further, right? So this is the last exercise that you'll be doing. Take a photo or sketch the prototype or even the experience that you have interacting with people. We want to see evidence or proof that you actually went out there. Number two, what did you learn from the stakeholder or end user after sharing your prototype? Is it good? What do you need to improve? It doesn't, we're not looking for people who says that your product are excellent, then you get extra marks. But more importantly is the process allows you to learn new things about your product that you can use to move forward. So that's what we're looking at, right? All right. So that's it for today's module, but I will be taking questions. I saw there was one question earlier. All right, let me have a read of AJ's question. Huh? Okay, this is a very good question. Should we target everyone or should we target a niche group, right? For a startup, for a new business, you have limited resources. So, and when you're introducing product to the market, there are some groups that will adapt to your product faster than some group of customers. So in developing this, I think it's best to identify a niche group first, which we can call early adopters. So once these early adopters have adopted your product, then maybe from then you have a base customer in place. And from there, you can expand to maybe the more early mainstream, and then you move on to the late mainstream and so on, right? So I hope I answered that question. Any other question, guys? Oh, this is not, B2B or B2C, there are still customers. I am in the training business, for example, right? So we deal with B2B as well. So you identify who is it that make the decision to choose your product, Aaron. So are they the procurement manager, or are they the head of a department for engineering? Identify what are their pain points. What is it that they want? So from that interview, or what are the problems that they've had with other service provider in the past? You see, by just asking some of these questions, it allows you to go back to your team and see how best we can answer this so we can solve their problem by using empathy again, come up with ideas that can solve that problem, and we prototype it, and then it is more likely that the product is easier for them to accept than a product that's probably did not go through the process of understanding the pain points, the needs of the customer. I hope I answered that question. Any other question, guys? You will have until end of, Dennis, you will have until the end of the 5 weeks program that we're having. 5 weeks is about a month plus a little bit. So there's about a month plus for you to complete everything. But these are short, almost micro exercises. I encourage you to really have fun with it. Don't stress yourself. It is a creative process, as I've mentioned again and again throughout the course, right? So there are 4 questions, four activities. Number 1, frame the problem that you're trying to solve. Sometimes you can write a few how might we statements, and then from there you choose one. Number 2 is the ideation. Come up with maybe 30, 50, 100 ideas, and then cluster them into the top 5 that you have thought about, and choose one. We want to see the convergence happening from 50 or 30 to 5 to 1, right? And then build a prototype that you actually test with your customer. Okay, let me try to answer the next question from Sarah first before I get back to you, Aaron. All right, Sarah, you can contact me afterwards, or or you can post it in the group as well if you don't mind sharing. I think it's always good to learn from peers. Number 2 is oh, Aaron, corporate professional can be tough to reach. Yes, they can be. It is a little bit of an effort. I'm not saying you're wrong there, but one way is if you can't do a physical one, if you can just ask them for like a call where you can take we can do the interview on via phone. Sometimes by email, but you miss out a lot of the body language and the nuances, like the cognitive bias that we talk about. But another way of doing this is maybe to look at what we call analogous experiences. That means that if you can't interview the same person, then you look at the person who has similar problems, but you have access to them. So that's one way of looking at it. For example, I've seen cases where people work in like high stress places and all that, but they have access to maybe a prison warden and all that. They can, although it's an extreme example, they can still compare that stress experience, although it's not as best, I think, compared to really talking to the end user themselves, right? Okay, all right. But very good questions. Thank you so much, guys. You guys have been very, very active online. I think I'm learning something as well, that in some areas, they like to have the mic on and ask questions personally. I quite like as well, I'm receiving questions via group chat. I think that's faster as well. So before we go, I need you guys to take this link. Maybe I'll write it out here. And help me to fill up a little short survey, just 3 questions on the workshop today, so that we know that it has been relevant to all of you. Okay, before we go, last thing is I would like you guys to all turn on your mic so that we can take a group selfie. Is that okay? Just for a short while, turn on your mic.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
If it's not on selfie, it didn't happen, right? Don't worry about it. Nice. Please chat. You got Shell Helix Plus there. Right. Oh, there's more. 2 selfies. Everybody there. I think it's maximum.
Yo, Azuar, yo.
I didn't see that. Nice with the mask.
Assalamualaikum everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Hajah Fitria here.
Hajah Fitrai. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Some are not switching on the mic, so I'm just gonna. We have a lot, so we have to. Hold on, there's the mouse. Okay. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow, right? 3 p.m. Then we'll discuss about this. All right?
All right.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. Okay. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Don't forget the feedback link, eh? I'll just leave the link on for a while in case anybody wants to copy. It's okay. It's okay. No worries about the camera thing. No, Shafina. Thanks, Jay, for joining us. All right.
No problem, Azuar. Great session.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks for the advertisement, passion fruit. I like your mug.
Extra point. Everybody drink the Shell mug.
You're supposed to get paid for that, actually. Just kidding.
Right, everybody got the link, so I can end the chat.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hey, wait. I didn't put the link on the everyone. I put it on the image. Oh, that's the link, guys. I actually just sent it to Dennis. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting for all. Take care, guys.